Hello, coders. You know who this is. Thanks a lot for taking the time to go over this series of video tutorials that I'm going to walk you through how to make or how to build a very basic uh, REST API automation framework. This is something that SDETs do, or at some point in their careers, they will be required to do this. So what happens is that we have a lot of tools out there for REST API testing. You can use Postman, Newman, REST Assure, a lot of all of these things. But sometimes you need a custom solution. You need a solution that you can enhance or add more functionality as your team keeps growing. And that's the whole idea behind this. So I'm going to use existing Python libraries in order to do this. And I'm going to go with Python because it's one of the most common languages used by SDETs to create this type of solutions. And again, there's always different ways to do things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide the most naive solution, and then we're going to build on top of it. That's kind of my development motto. I try to get bigger projects and break them into smaller pieces that then I can work towards. So this is going to be the very basics. All right, so that you have an idea of how things are going to be working. And then once you have kind of like the wireframe, the skeleton, then now it's up to you to enhance it or build it or make it even better. Okay, so the first thing that we need when we're going to create a framework for a REST API is we need a REST API application that it's running somewhere and that I can hit the endpoints and then I can get data back. So for this tutorial, I built this very basic REST API application using Fast API. And it's not a big deal. It's just a very basic application where you have your gets, your puts, your deletes, your posts, just to kind of like show you how you can build this framework. And then you can start getting a little bit fancier with your calls. So for this one, you will need git, docker, and make. And follow the instructions right here. What I did is I already checked that project out, and following the instructions, I'm just gonna go and do make run. And this is supposed to bring the application, stand up the application inside a Docker container. And we want to Dockerize this because we want to be easily distributed among teams. And at the same time, you're learning about Docker technologies. So you can see that it's running up, it's running on port 8080, which is my local host. So if I go there and I refresh, you can see it right here. And it's a very basic thing. We have a couple of sections. We have comments, we have users, we have authentication, and we have health. On the right, you can see that we have this little lock here, which means that this particular endpoint, the user that is going to issue those, it needs to be authenticated with the system. You can think about it as endpoints that require some level of privilege. And if you don't have that privilege, then you can call them. And then right here, we have others that don't have that little lock there. It means that these are open, like this particular one, health, right? If you try it out, you execute it, you can see the curl command that it's using to hit that particular endpoint and what is the response and what is the data that you're getting back. And you can see here that I hit that one and I'm getting the 200s, the OKs, and whatnot. So this is going to be the application that we're going to use. So in order to get started, we're going to start with maybe this call, which is the one that doesn't require authentication. And then maybe use some other call here that requires authentication. By default, this application provides a user, credentials admin, so that way you can authenticate. You can try it right here. And you can see that now you're authenticated and now all the different endpoints can be called. So we have that user for testing purposes, right? So from a security perspective, you know, that's our horrible credentials, but bear with me. This is just for education purposes. So the first thing we're gonna do is let's start creating a virtual environment. So I'm gonna create a virtual environment right here. And I'm going to install two libraries that I'm going to need for my framework. Well, first I have to source their environment, right? source vn activate. So right there I activated. So the first thing that I'm going to install, it's going to be request, the request library. This is the one that we're going to use to start sending requests to the application or to the endpoints that I just showed you, and then start getting data back. And then the other one, here it's asking me to upgrade pip. So let's do that so that we get rid of that particular warning. Okay, there you go. And now the other one that I'm going to install is pytest. So pytest is going to be the Python testing framework that I'm going to use, and I like to use that one instead of the unit test one that comes by default with Python because it provides a little bit more functionality, and it helps you, to encapsulate specific pieces of code, and then you can make your code cleaner with less line of code for particular test cases. So we have that, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to freeze those into a requirements.txt. So that way I have my requirements in a single file, and if I have to reinstall them, I just have to call that file. Now let's create a folder. Let's create a folder. We're going to call it tests. And this is where our test cases are going to live. Now, from the application, you can see that we have it separated into different categories, right? So maybe I will have folders inside that test folder named comments, users, auth, and health. That way, I separate each particular test case under its own category. So here, the first one that we're going to use, it's going to be health. So that one meaning that, and then we're going to create a new file there. Test. Remember, for testing or for automation frameworks, you want those things to be picked up automatically. In Python, you have to start the name of the file with test. Everything that starts with test is considered a test in pytest or in Python. So they're going to be executed automatically. So here I'm going to put test health endpoint. And that's going to be my file. So we're going to start with this one. And what we're going to do is we are going to start importing the libraries that we're going to be using. So in this case, the first library that we want to import is pytest, import pytest. And then we're going to import requests, which are the two libraries that we just installed. And then what we're going to do is we're going to define our first test case inside this test file. That particular test case, again, we have to prefix it with test so that it gets picked up automatically. So it's going to be test health. That's the first one that we're going to do. And then what we're going to do is we're going to hit that particular endpoint for health. And we can see that it's running on localhost, and it's a get endpoint, or it's a get call. And this is the particular URL that we have to hit. So following the request library instructions, what we're going to do is we're going to do response. It's going to be equal to request get, and then we have to hit our local host, which in this case is localhost. It's running on 8080, and we can see that we have to hit health, right? And then once we hit that, the response is going to come back with the data. And what we want to make sure is that when we call this, we get a 200 OK. So you can do this response status code. I think there's something like that, and then compare it to 200. Or you can do something like this: response it's equal to OK. And if you do that, response equal to OK, what it's going to happen, it's that it's going to get the data, and then it's going to check if the response, we're getting a 200 out of a get, which is the OK one. OK response. For example, let's consider that if you're going to do a post, usually when you do a post, you're going to get a 201. You can also do response.OK. And if it's a post operation, it's going to come back as true because you got a 201. But if you get a 401 or a 404, then the response OK, it's going to come back as false. So there you go. There you have it. That's going to be our test. So now we're going to execute this particular test. So in order to execute it, we're going to go with pytest uh, test held, and the test held endpoint, and we're not hit. And there you go. Seems that our test case was executed and it passed. And you can see that when it was executed, you can see right here that a call was made to that application, and we can see it logged here. So if I re-execute it, see how right here, this thing, it's gonna update. There you go. That's another 200 okay. So that's it. We just created our very first test case against that particular application that it's running out there. Now this one, it's a little bit simple because it doesn't require any type of authentication. So now let's consider another one that will require authentication. And what I'm going to consider here, I'm going to consider this first one, get comments. So right here you can see that I'm authenticated. If I'm going to give it a try and I execute, it's getting all the comments out of that are currently on that system. Now here we're getting an empty array because we don't have any comments posted. But what we're interested here is how the curl command was issued. And you can see that it's doing a get operation to the endpoint / comments. And then we are setting up a couple of headers. First header, it's the application.json. And the second one, it's an authorization header with the value of the token. So we have to calculate that token first in order to send that particular token, attach it to the header of the call, and then get the response back. Hope you're following me right here. So in order to do that, we have to first, there are going to be two operations involved here. You know, when I issue this call, there were two operations involved. The first one is that I authorize here. So I created that authentication token. And then I make the get call. So these are two separate calls, right? So let's do that. Here, under test, let's create another folder. And this one is going to be comments. And under comments, new file. Here we're going to create test comments py, right? Probably this one right here. Let's rename it. We don't need here endpoints, right? It was just me trying to be explicit, but we know that all these operations are going to be endpoints at the end. So let's go with comments. And again, for comments, same thing, py test. Oops. Then we're going to import requests. And then what we're going to do is we're going to define our test case. And this one is going to be get test all comments. Because that's the get operation that we're going to hit right there. So we're going to get all comments. Now, the first thing that we have to define, remember, this one's a two-step operation. Kind of like let's put here, step 1, authenticate. And then here, step 2, it's going to be get comment. So let's do the first one. So how do I authenticate? How do I create that authorization token? So let's go back to our application. And you can see that here we have a post request called auth logging that it's going to generate the token. And this one, it's not logged because, well, you can issue this call if you're already logged in the system. So what we want to do here is we want to try it out, and we want to see how the curl command looks like. In this case, we're going to go with admin, which is our username and password. So if we execute this, here we can see the call, and here we can see the data that we're getting out. The response is going to be a dictionary. An access token is one of the elements of that dictionary, and you can get the value of that token by accessing that particular item in the dictionary. But here you can see that they're issuing this post request to auth login with some content type application x www form unencoded. URL encoded. So this is something that we have to replicate. Fortunate for us, requests already does that for us. We don't have to define those headers. We can simply use the request library and pass the username and password has a payload. So in order to do that, you're going to do something like this. We're going to define the payload first, and then we're going to say username. And our username, we already know, it's admin. And we are going to pass another one, which is going to be our password. And we already know that our password is admin. So here comes our first call. Response, it's going to be equal to request. And we have to make a post request. Remember? So that post request, we're going to hit our HTTP URL, HTTP localhost. We're running on 8080. And we have to hit the auth logging endpoint. That's the one, remember? That's the one that it's being used right here. This particular endpoint. That's the one that we're going to be hitting. And now what we're going to do is we're going to pass our data has the payload. So we're going to do data is equal to payload. So what these, it's going to do or replicate the exact same thing that the URL command or the CURL command did. You can see that it's very, very clean and we don't have to worry about the headers or anything. All we have to worry about is passing the username and password. And then here we're going to create an assert and we're going to say, okay, if the response comes with a successful status code, which is a 200, then we're going to be okay. So if that happens, then we're going to move to step number 2. And step number 2, we're going to get the token. We're going to put some headers, and then we're going to send those headers to the next request. So first thing we have to do is we are going to response JSON, and then we're going to get the access token. So what I'm doing right here, you can see it's that I'm getting a dictionary back, and then I'm using JSON to convert that dictionary, and then I can access that as the access token. So what I'm pretty much doing is by passing that access token, I'm saying, give me this value right here. So once I have that value, now I need to build the request headers for my next get operation. So the first header that we're going to have, it's the authorization header. And this is going to be a var, and here we're going to pass the access token. So this particular thing right here, what I'm doing is let's go back to this one. I am building this header. You can see that's an authorization var, and then it's the value of the token. So that's the one that I have. And then I have this other one right here. So I have this. Now I have to create the other one. Accept application JSON. Cool, perfect. So those are my headers. So now let's send the request. Response is going to be equal to request get HTTP. Whoops. Oh, that's okay, right? HTTP localhost. We are on port 8080. And we're going to issue the call to comments. And I'm going to override the headers. Headers, it's going to be equal to my request headers that I defined. And finally, I'm going to assert a response that it's okay. So that means that if I authenticate and then I pass the authentication token to this other call, get it, build the request headers, and then pass that request header to this get comments, it means that I need to get a status code 200, and I should be able to see those comments, which in this case, it's just an empty array because we don't have any comments. But this is providing the flow that we have, that we want. First, authenticate. Second, issue the call. So let's see what happens. py test comments, test comments py. So I'm going to send that one. And here it says test, no tests to run. Let's see why we don't have any tests to run. Oh, look at that. I forgot to save my file. And we have here an error, a SAP JSON right here. So why is that happening? Well, because that's a point, and what we need is a comma. So that's a typo from my side. So let's clear this one out and run it. Good, we got it. And we saw here how it was the things that it did. First, it hit a post request, and then it got logged in, and we got that access token. Then we got that access token, and then pass it as a header to this other call right here, so that we can get all the comments. And we had a 200 OK. Let's run it again and see if it's still working. There you go, it's still working. Not really sure what this temporary 307 thing is. It seems that it's not impacting us. But that's it. With that, we have demonstrated how you can automate the flow on this particular endpoint and this particular endpoint. One without authentication, the other one with authentication. So all the other ones with authentication will have to follow the exact same pattern. You log in, you get that token, then you pass that token as a header. Which, that one takes us to the following question. Let's see that we're gonna create here another one, test, create comment, or something like that. But in order to create a comment, you have to be authenticated. And in order to do that, you have to repeat these steps right here. And then you can issue the call to get to create the comment. So you can see here that we're starting to see a pattern. And we're starting to see a lot of code getting repeated, especially the logging one. So PyTest provides a way to encapsulate this data. And you can do it through fixtures. We can encapsulate this particular operation right here, do it just once, and then repeat it in all the different test cases that require authentication. So that is something that we're going to see in the next tutorial. So thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for staying with me. Thanks a lot for visiting my channel. And don't forget to smash that bell and hit that subscribe button if you like what do you see. See you next time.